Everyone. This is the Pacific Hermitage, monks at the Pacific Hermitage.
Yep.
I'm Ajahn Cunda.
I'm Ajahn Kovilo.
Nisabho.
I don't know if we need to keep doing that every
There might be someone new.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or maybe they forgot. You never know.
Always these decisions and tensions. So it's some people have remarked that it's going to start snowing. It hasn't snowed here in a while. We've had very little snow. Talking about the weather. Not much else going on.
Not much else, at least in the monastery.
Yeah, not in the monastery. News from abroad, but not so much news here in White Salmon.
Although it's been raining, we've had nice alms rounds through the forest. We go out every morning, and it's usually about a hour and a half or 2 hour walk. And it was a little bit cold this morning, but it's refreshing, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the forest, the sort of just a nice feel going through a wet kind of foggy
it was
forest.
Misty and foggy this morning. So
So we have a sutta
We
to talk
do.
about,
Yes.
and a subject to talk about.
And questions already coming in.
Questions already coming in,
So
good.
keep on typing, and we'll just start into what Ajahn Jindo is about to say. But we will keep an eye on the questions that are coming in as well.
You can you plus that, make that a little bit
I
bigger?
can definitely plus this and make it bigger.
Yeah, your questions are very helpful. They help guide us as we're talking about whatever theme it is or sutta it is that we have. So
which for today is the Sutta Majjhima Nikaya, number 119, the middle-length Discourses of the Buddha. The name of the sutta is Mindfulness Immersed in the Body, the Kayagata Sati Sutta. This is one of the foremost discourses of the Buddha, which give fairly concrete instructions for meditation. So I think it's fairly well known among Western in Western meditation circles.
yeah, it's kind of the most important element that people have taken out of the Eightfold Path, I think, in terms of popular Buddhism and what's out
Meditation,
there. Yeah,
you mean?
meditation, vipassana, these things, these movements.
One kind of unique thing about this is that, I mean, this sutta is about mindfulness of the body as a whole. People who've read it or people who might be reading it now, you'll notice that it gives many different methods of staying with the body. And the first suggestions are related to the breath. So I think most people, when they come to meditation, are introduced to meditation through breath meditation, whereas this is kind of a wider umbrella. It's a wider focus, which for people who are really trying to live the path, this is a bit more doable. Like, it's hard to pay attention to your breath while you're, typing away, doing emails, doing Zoom, whatever. But you can always pay attention to your body. You can pay attention to your posture. There's, all sorts of different exercises, which we'll get into. But
It's a beautiful theme that the Buddha has because he gives so many, not just in this sutta, but so many possibilities of how to follow his path.
yeah.
You could, there's not really an excuse, There's just so many, you can say, well, if you looked at this sutta or that sutta or whatever, so there's just so much. But this is just one, and it's on a subject that could seem narrow, but it's actually quite open what mindfulness of the body means.
Yep. And these subjects are they're totally ecumenical. There's nothing Buddhist about the body. There's nothing Buddhist about the breath. And so these are meditation topics which are easy to approach. Again, no excuses, people. If you're not meditating, you
Gotta do it.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, the questions might help us guide us, because I'm not quite sure where to jump into it either. But one of the questions was Dave saying, is it too simple to understand the sutta as knowing the body is not self? And is this the way to all transcendence? And which is a big question and a good one. And then also Mary Webster, I believe, asked, how can you consciously tranquilize the body using the breath? I always find an element of force.
That's another good question.
Venerables?
Well, you haven't spoken. Do you want to say anything?
Right. So
That's a good way to pawn it off.
I think good try. I think that like Ajahn Kovilo said, this is comprehensive in that it deals with these intense insight techniques around looking at the body, like the parts of the body, or the body in various states of decomposition, which are important practices. But I think breath meditation is the sort of cornerstone, at least for many practitioners, of one's entrance into all these things. Because without a decent state of calm in the mind, then contemplations such as the 32 parts of the body are more or less really hard to access at any deep level. They won't sink in, especially elemental contemplation. That, at least in my experience, and I've heard Kruba Ajahn speak about this, is it's a really profound shift in perception, and it requires a good deal of concentration. So for me, yeah, these steps around getting to know the body through the breath is really tantamount and one of the most important places to enter into this whole realm. And Mary's question, you know, this ties into Dave's question in terms of, I think that to know the body as not self, to apply these perceptions around, you know, the elements or 32 parts, may be the end goal of the sutta, but to do that at any realistic or powerful level, one needs to have the mind in a state of calm, which for me is related to Mary's question about tranquilizing the body using the breath. And I'd say that in my experience, the element of force might be the wrong word, but that we tend to enter, at least in my experience, meditation with a lot of intention, and because we're just coming out of the day, and to use that intention skillfully and play with the breath energy, you know, finding an expedient means to move the breath into the lower realm of the body. Thanissaro Bhikkhu gives a lot of, you know, instructions on imagining light coursing through the crown of the head down to the legs. Ajahn Sucitto recommends imagining a thing of butter melting down your neck, but sort of bringing the attention to the torso, and then you can really explore the subtle body in that way, and that way you can use intention to play around with the breath energy until things calm down, and then I find you can approach much more subtle points of breath meditation, like the point at the nose. That was a long answer. Venerables?
Well, I was just thinking, I think with Mary's question, it's just so common to feel that when one is observing the body, that there's some strength behind it that eventually feels like dukkha to me, like that sense, as she was saying, force is a good word. It's sort of like forced. It's sort of pushed. It's something that's like there's pressure upon our own awareness, and again, like that is something that it's hard to get behind that, but it's possible to get behind it so that one is actually observing that force or that push. And so in terms of like observing the breath, and then you feel this pushed energy, then actually you start to bring your mind to what is that experience actually like when I'm feeling that this is forced or pushed, or you know, it's something that's like feeling like a pressure, like I have to observe this, I have to be good, I have to be diligent, you know, all of this kind of what I would say is wrong effort, because those are unskillful mind states that are coming up. And so basically, I think in terms of that, in terms of how to tranquilize the mind without forcing one's awareness on the breath, is really trying to get interested in what that quality of pressure is like, what that quality of pushing is like. So you can kind of get to know it, and then you start to, there starts to be a separation. You know, the awareness kind of separates from it, and it's like that becomes an object of meditation. And then you might say, but that will feel forced. So I think it's just playing with it and continuing to deal with that. And that should hopefully help. But the other thing that might help is changing one's awareness. So for me, what helped with that particular issue is actually expanding the breath to meaning like the breath of the body and the whole body. So that's more what Ajahn Jeff teaches, Nisabho Bhikkhu, and that's actually expanding, like to really feel like the movement of the body, the movement of the experience of your body. And he talks about that as the wind element, and that would be sort of the breathing of the body. And I find that a much more tranquil experience for myself, rather than watching it at the tip of the nose or somewhere, some point that I'm trying to push my concentration into. So that's kind of that one point. Do you have?
Yeah, no, you make good points. I mean, and I think it really, part of, figuring out meditation is just figuring out what works for you. You mentioned like, using the breath energy, and you talk to Nisabho about the meridians and things. And although I those do work for me, that language, that vocabulary does work for me, and I don't think it works for everybody. Like there does seem, Western medicine hasn't fully bought into the idea of meridians and energy channels or chakras and these things. And that's one area where I feel like this discourse is, a bit more approachable, in that it doesn't use this language, and rather than like thinking of, in response again, maybe to Mary's question of relaxing the body through the breath energy, like just relaxing the body, like bring attention to the face, bring attention to the shoulders. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be anything mystical. And just relaxing. And that's, if you're doing it from a place of knowing, then that's part of the path. That's what the Buddha is talking about.
I agree. And I think just relaxing is a great way to enter into all of this. And also I think the language is really important here. Like the word force, like a good metaphor for me in terms of breath meditations, like, a substitute teacher trying to control a room full of 30 screaming kids. Like you sit down out of a busy day, and if you just try to force the body to be quiet, it's like the teacher just yelling at the kids. But if you're skillful and send the kids out to do some like wholesome activity, a team builder outside for a while, something that's sort of controlled, directed, but has a broader scope and allows not force, but intention, which is going to be operating at the beginning of meditation quite strongly. Like we've just come from doing, and it takes a while for intention to kind of calm and soften. So for me, Ajahn Jeff has always said those basic instructions around like, just let the breath do what it wants. At the beginning of meditation, I always find that it didn't really work. And Ajahn Jeff's sort of advice was that we have this intention, and if you just try to tell yourself not to just let the breath be what it is, then sometimes the intention will just move to this subterranean level. So it's much better, and that's when the breath gets really tight and forced. So it's much better to kind of work with it on a surface conscious level. And that's for me what this idea of like what Ajahn Cunda is saying around tracking the sort of subtle breath energy, or whatever you want to, if a language like this works for you, around the body and exploring. It's sort of like letting the kids run around for a while. And then after things have calmed down and you've sort of run that intention out, then things can gather a lot more in one spot. And that's like having all of them sit down. So I think force is intention applied unskillfully. But intention itself is not bad if it's applied skillfully, I'd say.
The right intention.
The right intention.
Yeah.
Skillful effort.
I think it's a great simile, just of looking at your body like a classroom full of kids. You don't have, these kids are not fully under your control. You can't, and similarly, we can't just control the whole body. And it kind of brings to mind, the Buddha's, just supreme skillfulness in creating metaphors. In this discourse alone, you have discourses, descriptions of making the body like an upright door, which, even if, a ball of twine is thrown at it, the ball is just going to bounce right off. Making the body like, a pool or a pond of water, such that crows can even, drink out of it. And these are like similes which are, one, they're beautiful. They're pointing to the felt sense of uprightness, the felt sense of fullness in the body. But at the same time, just like your simile, they're pointing to the not self nature of this. Like the body is like a pond, in that the pond is not me. The body's not me. in all of the similes, I think there are probably a good half dozen in this discourse alone. Did either of you were you taken by any similes in particular?
Well, I was just thinking of that first question, or the other question around not self, and definitely like the Buddha's. I mean, yeah, you can find not self in so many different examples that the Buddha gives. But I wouldn't go as far as to think that like the interpretation of the sutta would be just simply not self, because it's possible to get insight into the Dhamma through not self, but it tends to be a bit of a harder access door for most people, as I've sensed from speaking with people. Whereas dukkha is easier, because dukkha is pretty easy to understand, and then you have impermanence, which is I think one of the main teachings that the Buddha is bringing in, that we ignore constantly, and it's always happening. The sense that each breath, everything we do is just constantly like arising and fading away, and through that, then we can get a sense of not self from that. That's very much where the sense of dukkha and anicca really show us that. I've just found that not self can be seen by some as simple and understandable, whereas I tend to think of it as a fairly complex or a hard to see, almost sometimes hidden notion, because the Buddha doesn't say you can actually see a self, and he doesn't say there's no self, which is important to know. He says there's not self, so that whatever you think of as self, it's not correct, but he doesn't say there's no self. So like you could say there is a self there, but it's conjured, so it's not actually real, but still there's something there that you believe in. So that's where he uses, as I've seen it, this sense of not self. So in the sutta, I see that with kind of, in a sense, you could sum it up that way by saying like exploring the four postures, or having full awareness of the body, foulness of the body, 32 parts. These are all really breaking apart our notions, as I've talked about before, like your sort of map of the body, or what you think it is. It's breaking it apart, so you don't actually see it as that solid being that you think you are. So that it's incredibly helpful, but also I wouldn't overestimate just that I think that sometimes the difficulty of penetrating that, of really truly understanding not self. So.
For me, I think that's true, Ajahn, and it speaks to Dave's question here for me around the example of the butchered cow as coarse and violent, and that, for those who don't have the sutta right in front of them, is the metaphor the Buddha applies to dissecting the body in terms of elements. And I know Bhante Analayo has said that in this sutta, the analogy the Buddha gives for going through the 32 parts of the body, nails, teeth, skin, is like going through a bag of rice and separating the different sorts of grain, where he's separating the body into elements, which is another not self-practice, like you're saying, Ajahn, is compared to this pretty violent image of butchering a cow, which in India is even more shocking.
Well, it's not butchering a cow. Like, it's basically the cow has already,
yeah,
it's already dead.
That's important. Yeah,
it's already dead.
But still dividing, that's a good point. So dividing it up. Nonetheless, though, still a significantly more, it burns itself into it's a more intense metaphor than just looking through a bag of rice. And I think, for me, I've always interpreted that because as the power of the elemental contemplation, like I know Longpo Pleen was asked about looking at, say, the repulsiveness of food compared to looking at things as elements, and he said the repulsiveness of food practice, or like looking at, say the disgustingness of or the non-attractiveness of various elements in the body, etc., is more, specifically food in this case, is elementary, whereas the practice of dividing the body into elements is like the highest of dhammas. And I've met really respected teachers. I think Longpo Si, one of the oldest Ajahn Chah disciples, is his name Longpo Si?
There's Longpo Si.
All he talked about was the elements. He's just like, all we are is earth, wind, fire, etc., which is one way of looking at things. But point being that I think it's a really profound contemplation that requires perhaps a lot more samadhi to really access, and I think that's why that metaphor is applied, because it's such an intense contemplation, and it really does rip apart the sort of sense of self as far as I can tell. But
I was thinking too, as a butcher, the Buddha might have been getting across a sense that butchers, that's what they do. So they're used to cutting up an animal's body and not really making a big deal out of it. Because on the surface level, I mean, who knows what's going on a deeper level. There could be division within oneself around that whole experience. But for a butcher, some butchers might have a problem with it and can keep doing it. But I would assume that some butchers, as the Buddha is just talking about here, that's just their profession. It's just kind of like they really don't see it maybe as a living being or as something that, it's sort of just like, it is like elements to them because they become so accustomed to just cutting up meat in that way. So I don't think the Buddha is definitely taking a moral stance here. He's not he's just using it as an example, and most of his examples to explain kind of Dhamma is through really all kinds of metaphors that can be, they can be kind of distasteful. We think about the body or the foulness of the body or things like that. And I know people have definitely, I remember once a person came to me crying around when I was describing the 32 parts contemplation and went through a meditation. And later this person had said, this is kind of like really is harmful for me to think about with my own body because I already have problems with my own body. And Ajahn Jeff talks about that a lot as well. And so it's, again, we come back to not self, and we're trying to see the body as it is. So if somebody were to say, how could you think of the body as being disgusting, for example, I don't want to have that negative concept of my body. And I think the idea is more, well, it isn't negative, it's realistic. It's like if I was to actually cut out my liver right now and pull it out, I don't think my Venerable brothers or people watching would not have a sense of horror and disgust and fear arise, and also kind of like derision, sort of.
It would take the live stream in a different direction.
Yeah, it would take the live stream.
Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
I won't do that. It'd be yucky, it'd be kind of like, here's my liver, and it'd be kind of, there'd be fluids coming out and all kinds of stuff. So that's the point, I think, is it's not self. It's not something that we need to take personally, and it's a more realistic understanding of our body. That if we really truly picture the parts of our body, they're not attractive. We talk about the heart in these romantic ways, but you pull it out and you cut it up, and it's just not that attractive.
One kind of impression which one gets when reads this discourse is the Buddha's looking at the body, explaining the body, talking about the body in many different ways.
Yeah.
Like I've heard it described, the Buddha does not just have one singular body discourse. It's not like his message or his narrative about the body is only, it's just an unbeautiful, like disgusting thing.
Because there are elements as well.
Yeah, or it's not like the body is this inherently beautiful thing in every way. It's like the Buddha is able to look at different aspects of this, and the similes bear that out. Like the simile of you have a bag of rice with holes at both ends. The bottom is tied up, and then you've just got, it's not just rice, but you've got paddy rice and hill rice and mung beans and sesame seeds, and that's a completely like neutral discourse. And one way which I like to think about this discourse is like basically it's about gaining like an internal intimacy. Like many, especially modern day kind of New Age or like other teachings are really about external intimacy, really trying to savor the external objects of desire. Whereas it's not trying to provoke desire, but it is basically, what does it feel like? How can I be very, in touch with what it feels like to have a body? And so I appreciate the Buddha's kind of shifting that focus, shifting that attention, turning it around.
I agree, and I think looking at it as not this dark contemplation. I mean, first of all, Ajahn Jeff points out the fact that like uh, negative body image is based on comparing our own bodies to others, and this is just and saying they're attractive and I'm not, whereas this is just seeing all bodies as they are. But the other is just the idea of, you think of how bright the Buddha said that the mind and the citta can be, this profoundly bright, brilliant, beautiful thing. And then you consider how much we judge people and ourselves based on this, compilation of calcium and blood, and how much the mind that identifies itself with this mantle of clay, as the Christians put it, compromises itself. So if you can just give the mind a little bit of detachment from that, then suddenly it shines forth with a radiance you would not expect. And that's the strange thing about a Subha practice, is if it's done well, and you do see the body as a little bit, you get some detachment from it, then it doesn't usually result in a darkness in the mind, but rather the mind begins to realize its own radiance, because it's not identifying itself with the mantle anymore. And it's almost like we've mistook the veil as the face for so long, and this is just drawing back the veil and seeing the brightness behind it. And so I mean, it's a strange practice, and it does not go over well in a lot of circles without explanation, but it really can usher into beautiful mind states if it's done skillfully.
Just a point of explanation. The Venerable just used a word, may have sounded like a super meditation, but what he actually said was a subha, A-S-U-B-H-A, Pali word meaning
Foulness.
or
Not beautiful.
Literally not beautiful.
Not beautiful.
Yeah.
You could also have foulness.
You could.
But yeah, we could.
I mean, that's the one in this translation. I was thinking though, as you were talking about that, my own experience, for example, with asubha. So subha is beautiful, and then we have is not. Is actually a lessening, just a very diminished. It's never been like profoundly diminished desire, but it's been like kind of, it really. Like for me, it's not like there's these blazing insights that occur with thinking about the body and the parts and everything like that as we're getting into it. It's sort of more like, oh yeah, I don't have so much coarse desire. I'm not that interested in sensuality anymore. And so what that has as an effect is just a noticing that the mind is much calmer, and it's not looking through greed to satisfy something through the senses. And I just find that so calming and helpful, and I kind of think it essentially what it does for me is it takes the edge off. So I don't find that a subha practice really I haven't made it a main meditation object, but I use it at times, and I find it just takes that edge off of desire, where it's like if I practice it for a while, it's just there's not that much interest in kind of the mind going out and getting something for myself, and beauty of other people or food or whatever it might be.
Can I ask a kind of deeper question? So you talk about lessening desire, just to play Mara's advocate here.
Yeah.
Why would you want to decrease your desire? Why would a person want to decrease desire?
Because desire is evil. So
I didn't say it.
the reason that I find that desire is and I'm talking about unwholesome desire in this instance. So I'm not talking about the desire for being generous or kind, or the desire for skillful states of mind, quiet, calm. More like the desire just to have my senses pleased, to be interested in ephemeral things and or the world, the news, whatever it might be. The reason I find that that's a benefit is because it allows me to see things more clearly, and the mind can settle down, and it's not fooled by this chasing of sense pleasures, and this chasing of distractions, and this chasing of views, and essentially like this self of me first. I need to get, whatever I need, and kind of it pushes other people away as well. When you're filled with desire, you're often not concerned with other people. So all of that is lessened to a degree. It's like it drops it down 30% or a third or something like that. And then all of a sudden there's, oh wow, there's just not that much interest in doing things that are going to rile me up or get me excited, or because that causes the meditation to be quite unpleasant actually when I'm riled up and I'm thinking and I'm chasing after something.
So like lessening desire is a skillful means to non-selfishness,
but also seeing clearly, seeing the mind clearly and seeing
okay,
the
I accept.
clearly.
I accept.
You accept? All right.
We approve.
I'm not a very good Mars advocate. Yeah.
You mentioned politics, Ajahn.
Oh dear. But monks don't talk about politics. So, there was a question from our that was asked. I'll say it's anonymous, and we could talk about it for a moment or a bit. Obviously, I think most people are aware that there was some rioting in the capital, and people were killed, and so I think the skillful way to talk about that is not to talk about how evil people can be and how they're not like us. It's more a sense of, well, there's so many ways to talk about it. You can just say this is the Dhamma arising. This is what the Buddha actually talks about, and to not expect it to happen, or to think that it's like wasn't possible or is beyond us. I mean, one of the things we've talked about is, are any of the three of us actually sure that in a particular situation, even in our lives right now, if we were in a particular situation where we're starving or whatever it might be and conditions were changed, we wouldn't be capable of harming somebody or killing somebody? I don't know. It's not actually, how can we predict? I think a lot of people who are in situations just don't, you can't always know how you're going to be because we're always changing. And I think the Buddha, in terms of talking about not self, there's really, we can't necessarily take a position on who and what we are and say, this is who I am, I would never do anything like this. And that's our intention now. But my point is to think, well, the people who harmed others in this riot, they are human beings. They were given to emotions. They didn't probably have Dhamma as their path. And this is what does happen in a worldly sense. So you have that perspective, and then we have the perspective, which I'll also want to hear from the two of you about, or in terms of like, well, we deal with that as Buddhists from an internal perspective, where this sutta actually has to do with, well, how do you deal with this? You use mindfulness, the body, to deal with your suffering around this experience. So.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, not everybody can be a monk. Not everybody wants to be a monk. And even for monks, we still, live in the world. And one kind of quotation from Immersion, which comes to mind with regards to news. I've mentioned it to you two before, but you all haven't heard it yet. So there are many things of which a wise person might wish to be ignorant. And I don't say that to fully negate, like, reading the news, but it can be kind of just an energy sinkhole, or just there's no end to it really. It's you just can scroll on forever with news, and honestly, I'll admit it, and we do live in a modern monastery, and we do, as you can see, we have the internet, and yeah, this past week, I mean, I watched more news than I had in the past 20 years. I mean, other people compared it to 9/11. But yeah, I definitely could feel that it wasn't, I can get the gist of something and not have to fully soak myself in it, and it's kind of, my dad calls his morning like Facebook, and he reads like 3 or 4 different newspapers. He calls it his morning negativity bath. So
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, as practitioners, I mean, you don't want to be, soaking yourself in, and just the realm of so many different views. Everybody has got an opinion about it, and yeah, do you really need to have an opinion? Do you really want to have an opinion? Maybe the answer is yes, but yeah, you can, the more calm your mind is when you're looking at these things, unless you've been kind of just fully floored by, several hours of looking at it, then, the clearer you'll be able to kind of assess the facts that you do read, hopefully. True, and not spurious facts. Yeah.
No, I agree, and I think the negativity bath is a relevant phrase, as is Tamira's reflection that I worry that we come perilously close to spiritual bypassing and or indifference if we talk about this chaos as being simply the nature of reality. And I think what Ajahn Kovilo maybe is speaking to, and what I've heard Longpo Pasano speak to, is just a middle path with these things. Like, I think, people say that you want to be informed. And I'd ask, just for those words, I think sometimes go unexamined, like, we can be so informed for this, to the point where it's really affecting our mind state, or we can be informed enough to take action when it's appropriate. And I know Longpo Pasano has said, like, pick an issue that you really can have an effect on. It may be local, it may be otherwise, but, do research on that and really stay up to date on that. But then the other things, you can take a step back. And I think our opportunities to, I think those two words, stay informed, deserve a little more scrutiny than we tend to give them. And, like, how much do we actually have to take in every day to know those moments when we can make a difference? And yeah, that it really does affect the mind. And people say that evil lies in the gaze that sees evil all around it. And I think the same goes for good. Good lies in the gaze that sees good. And this is the essence of appropriate attention. Like, we don't want to ignore these things, but also taking care of our mind, and as practitioners holding that as really important. And just finding that balance. But I think most of us tend to fall on a bit more to the side of too much, perhaps. And just to finish up, I said something about this a few weeks ago, but just I think tracing things back to the First Noble Truth can be really helpful, like looking at the suffering that gives rise to various movements like this. And there's a great deal of suffering in society, and for me, compassion can open from that spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's a touchy subject, but I think it's up to each person to really look into their own minds and see what's helpful for them. And in one way we can say that the Buddha is encouraging us to have immersion in the body, to have a sense of what's going on here, and that is going to be influenced by what's going on out there, right? But it's all the same to me. It's like it's experience. We sort of the brain in the vat idea that you're just a brain influenced by experience. It's not so different than what's external or internal. So my point is that whatever it is that we're seeing, we're constantly trying to utilize that to understand dukkha. And like there was a phrase that you said, Ajahn Kovilo, scrolling on forever. And I think that's where our lives can lead, in terms of just continuing to scroll through, and each one of us has to say what's enough. What's enough for us to see, and what are we actually going to do about that? What's the reasoning behind why we're looking at so many images and seeing so many things? But surely we can neglect the Buddha's teachings, the teachings around non-suffering, and that's ultimately what we're trying to alleviate within ourselves. If we're just constantly paying attention to the world, that quote that I think I've said before is, why so much concern with news from abroad when all that concerns either life and death is alive inside of us? So, it doesn't mean that I'm not recommending just ignore the world. But one thing you said also is like around do something. When Prabhupada says do something, well, there's that old phrase that you hear sometimes, which is think globally, act locally. So for me, when I hear about things like this, or there are these kind of horrible problems in the world, what I see is how can I actually influence the people around me, just my own local sphere, so that they can have a positive experience in their own life and see a new way of looking at their own life that's beneficial, rather than a world conquering, like I want to change the world. So just something that I would suggest for people is think about skillful ways that we can deal with how we receive information, and then what to do about it.
To keep it, to like bring it back with the sutta, like one way we can do what you're suggesting is paying attention to the body. Like while you're watching the news, most people probably these days are using their computer, and just paying attention to your posture. I mean, how much are you literally just like absorbing into the screen? I certainly
become your head.
Yeah, exactly. You're just, the posture just becomes more and more kind of decrepit, and you just become more of this golem type creature, just fully, because the mind is actually kind of in a sense gone out. You're just fully absorbed into this whole nother world, which and leaving the content is one thing, and our reception of it is another, and we can certainly do something about the latter, like the way that we receive these things. And good questions, and certainly we have to deal with things that are going outside the monastery. So
yeah, I really agree, and I mean, we hear the concerns being brought up on the chat and all that. And our place as Sangha members is really to, it's not like we don't have opinions and things, but we are trying to hold a space where all are welcome, and speaking about Dhamma informing this community, but it's not like and we can speak to these principles in ways that everyone can receive, but then in sort of public discourse, this is sort of where we tend to speak to is to the Dhamma aspect of these things. But it's not like we don't acknowledge that in our own individual lives, and also specifically out in the world, like one does have to pay attention to community. One interacts with the community, we certainly do, and one sometimes will take action. But just what the Venerables are saying with how do we protect our own minds in the midst of that, and that's really, I think, what we're all pointing to. Not to disregard what people are saying, just to also consider one's own quality of mind a priority as well.
Also, maybe just an allowance. Like if you do want to take a break, if you do feel like it's too much, not everyone should need to feel pressured to all the time be informed of everything. And to have, I certainly I admire monks who don't, say, use the internet. I know one monk in Thailand who has never sent an email in his life, which is kind of amazing. And again, not everybody can be a monk, but all the more power to you if you want to take a media break, you want to take a fast, you want to put it aside because it's just too much. There's definitely a place for that, and and
I've done things exactly like that. Not like that. I've done that. So they call them news blackouts, and so you just don't have anything to do with the news, and you don't ask anybody. You'll find a way to weasel out of it. I don't want to know anything. And I read about people who'd done that. I read about others and found it true in my own experience. Wow, I was bored. I was a lot more bored, but I was a lot happier. I was much happier not knowing about this stuff. Now, that could cause a reaction. People could say, "Oh, this is horrible." How not knowing? You have to be informed. But well, okay, as monks, we have that privilege. So maybe that's a little bit easier to say as a monk. But these were people who I'd read about, just regular people doing it, and that most people just reported this profound, sort of like pacification. There just wasn't a feeling of needing to find everything out and get the information. And
certainly for periods of time. I mean, if you're trying to go deep into meditation, it's it's helpful to take a step back sometimes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So so anyway, I think that's, we've come actually to our 45-minute time now, and we will have another session on this.
Yes. Same
Friday
Discourse,
morning.
Friday morning.
So we can continue to take this up. We don't have to stop it. And if any of you have any further questions, I'm sure this provoked a bit of something. Just think of any questions you might have for us next week, and we'll try to have something interesting to say.